All right, welcome back for module number 2. I'm really excited about this one because this is the methodology that we use a lot with my class, and honestly, in talking to a lot of companies, this is kind of the way they work. We call it the Roth IRA. The Roth IRA is kind of an acronym for two different things here: ideation and actually implementation. So let me go over the Roth. So you have, like anything, a great idea starts exactly from that. It starts with a great idea. It's a realization you have. A lot of times, for some reason, when I'm mowing or I'm walking or running, I get a lot of great ideas. So that realization is key in the sense that great ideas come from great ideas, right? Now, after that great realization, before you forget about it, a lot of times I'll take out my phone. I'll even save things into my phone as an audio recording so I can remember it later. Remembering it later is really important in the sense that you now have to take it to open discussion, right? So this open discussion is really important, because just because you think it's a great idea doesn't necessarily mean it is a good idea. So oftentimes I'll have the group say, hey, I have this great idea for an app or a service or a product. And in that open discussion, I know that there's going to be a tussle, right? There's going to be a little bit of an argument over it. Now, first of all, we're going to have a section later on the fact that feedback is king. So don't get upset if somebody says your idea or your product, service, app, whatever is a bad idea. One of three things is going to happen from a tussle. Number one, you're going to defend it and win, and the other people are like, you know what, that is a good idea. Number two, you're going to defend it and lose. You're eventually going to say, wow, it seemed like a good idea at the time or in my head, but yeah, this isn't really that good. Or number three, and this is often what happens, you defend it, the person that was nice enough to give you the feedback defends it, and you guys kind of start working things out. And a lot of times this is heterogeneous grouping. I'm not trying to spell heterogeneous right now, which means the people that have different skill sets should be a team. Whatever you do, don't pick your buddies that have the same skill set. Actually, in the section after this, you're going to be hearing from the founder of Luber Elevate, as in Uber's flying car new division, flying cars, drones. They even talked about the fact that they did not assemble a team of everybody being the same. It's grouped heterogeneously. A lot of times people have different opinions. And by the way, great teams are built this way. A lot of times people point to, Steve Wozniak versus Steve Jobs. They had two completely different skill sets, and that's okay. Now, the Roth was the fun part. The Roth was like your friends talking about, like, hey, did you see on Shark Tank? I thought of that like a year ago. Roth is just conceptual, right? Now you move to the IRA, and this is where the rubber meets the road. We jokingly say the Roth is like the New Year's resolution, and the IRA is like February. So let's just go with the first I is ideation / iteration, right? The ideation is prototype number one. You said that you had a good idea for something. You said that this would be a good thing. What is beta test 1, or what is keystroke 1, or what is that quick MVP, a minimum viable product, or your mock-up? Because after you've ideated it, what I want you to do is get it out there. Get some feedback, because after a week or so, a lot of times we would give everything 2 weeks. We would reflect, right, on what we've done. That reflection is in the form of getting feedback and then saying, okay, what worked, what didn't. If you have a SketchUp of something, ask people to give you feedback on it, and then you can, in 2 weeks, go, okay, I'm going to reflect on it. Now, oftentimes with my students is that I would ask them to reflect either in one of three ways. Number one, you can do this as an audio activity in the sense that you can get out your phone and just talk out loud about your process, or with your team. Another way is you can go take to YouTube and then ask people for feedback and say, hey, what do you guys think of my new idea for an event that I want to charge for? Or lastly, there's even blogging, because you processing that first beta test out is really the most important thing, because then you can adjust. No company ever hits it on the first mark. Matter of fact, Ed Catmull, who was famously started Pixar, he says all Pixar films suck at the beginning. They keep iterating, which really, this new adjustment really leads you to a new realization. This is why this cycle always continues. So after you've adjusted, you have a new realization, you need to go back to your team and have a new open discussion. There should be a little bit of tussling, there should be a little bit of fighting. You might even have to form new groups or have to shuffle teams around. Or if it's just a team of two, you might have to part ways because you're like, this isn't working out. That's okay. That's when people start talking about fail early, fail often. This speeds it up. Because in that, now you've gone from ideation to iteration. Iteration, when you iterate something, you change it a little bit until you have the right formula. And so after you iterate, that is beta test number 2. You put it out there, you get feedback, you reflect another time, you make the necessary adjustments. You never stop, really. And I've seen products that, like, when Slack first made their updates, we were like, oh, we liked it the way it was. Constantly making small changes is really, really, really how innovation begins. Now, that's, again, the way a lot of companies work. I'm going to take you through one more simulation here in a second, but I want you, again, to really understand that this Roth IRA, if you can implement it into your life, if you can implement it into your schoolwork, your whatever you're working on, those realizations, get them out, get them onto a piece of paper so you don't forget them, open discuss, fight over it a little bit, tussle, not fight, find a group. All great entrepreneurs form teams. It's very rare that you're solo. Ideate, reflect, adjust, then iterate, reflect, adjust. All right, next I'm going to take you over a collect and connect session. Be right back. Now we're going to go over a collect and connect session. This is one of my favorite things I did. Matter of fact, I'm even going to go over something that happened my second year of teaching. A collect and connect session is you collect as many ideas or thoughts or concepts on a whiteboard. Again, whiteboard is my favorite piece of technology. I love being able to move around. That's why all the wild arms. And then getting ideas on. As a matter of fact, it's even better if you have a rolling whiteboard. By the way, you can walk around with it. But you collect as many ideas as you can, and then you try to randomly connect two things. So really quick, the second year of my innovation class, I was asking my students, at first I was trying to say, what are you passionate about? Right? In section 1, I was talking about what you're passionate about. I kept getting a lot of eye rolls and a lot of it was uncool to talk about what you're passionate about, but it was very cool to talk about what you didn't like. So I said, fine. What don't you like about school? And I had a collect and connect session, and here's how it went. So I said, okay, I'm going to write down all the things you don't like about school. Now, what do you think it was? The obvious stuff. B hallway smells. Lunch isn't long enough. The lunch isn't good enough. Why do I take this class? When am I going to use this in real life? And they just kept going. By the way, when I said the B hallway smells, it was like right next to the boys' locker room, and all these really obvious things. So they had about 40 things on the board, and I counted them up and I put numbers by them, and I said, great, double it. Why did I say double it? Because I now challenged you to go beyond the obvious on the collect part. So they were saying, well, we gave you everything. I said, no, you gave me 40 really obvious things that you don't like about school, things that everybody says. So here's the other thing I gave them time to do is give them the excuse to say something a little bit out there. Because they kept saying, well, even though this is a little weird, but you said we had to get to 80 things. And they started coming up with things a lot more creative. So again, when am I going to use this in real life? The classes are not good. The lunch is bad, whatever. Then all of a sudden they start saying, and I'll never forget this. I had one student who goes, my mom is a helper for the Down syndromes class, and I think that it really stinks that a lot of our students don't know who they are because they're in an isolated wing, and I think that stinks. And all of a sudden everybody was like, wow, that's a good point. Because they hadn't thought about the student side of it. They'd only thought about their needs and what they didn't like. And so all of a sudden some more things started to come up, and more and more students started, I had one student say, hey, I don't like it that we don't have coffee in here because around 1 o'clock I get really drowsy. So I write that on there. And then I had another kid goes, I don't like the fact that we have major brands in this school that we sell. We have a vending machine that sold cola, and they didn't like that. So anyway, we ended up getting up to 80. And I put numbers next to all of them, and then I had a student. I'm like, great, give me two numbers. And they're like, number 15 and number 7. I'm like, all right, B hallway smells and not enough time in between class periods. And they would come up with somewhat funny things because I forced them to get creative with those two things. So like one of the ideas was, sell Glade plugins that when you walked really fast to your next class, you would like send a vapor trail of vanilla, right? And some of these things were silly, but some of them were like, this isn't a bad idea. Like one student said, there's not enough time in lunch. And the other one said lunch wasn't good. And they said a walking taco would be a great solution. So I say all these things because it got really creative. And matter of fact, the student who said his mom's class, that students didn't know them, they came up with the idea of what if his mom's class started a coffee shop and made sure that they went through an independent non-cola brand to sell the coffee. And they made this journey from going from A to B in the sense that wasn't just a good idea, it was an idea worth executing. It was an idea worth executing because even though we started off in a silly way of having 40 things on a whiteboard and then 80 things on a whiteboard, eventually these crazy ideas to forcibly connect them together made sense. So a lot of times if you're ever working on a problem, do a collect and connect session. Come up with, as many things as you can on that topic. So let's just say it's like, fixing a problem in your town of student boredom, and then collect as many things as you can. When you've stopped with people, see if you can double that list. And then once you have a list, just randomly collect 2 things together. If you can connect 2 things together with one problem, you've got something interesting. If you can triangulate it, which means you can put like 3, like on the coffee shop idea, the students that weren't as visible, needing coffee and not working with big corporate names, they decided to work with a small independent coffee company. So those things were triangulated. I bring all these things up because that is really the idea generator that has worked for us the most. Collect, connect, and then sometimes triangulate. So do that as you're trying to look for some problems. Whiteboard, come up with people, double the list, see what you can do. All right. Now we're going to turn it over to our friends at Luber Elevate. I'm promising you, this is something you want to pay attention to. One, because it seems like Luber Elevate would like to work with us a little bit more. But this is a guy that formed a team that is starting to rethink the whole idea of not needing cars, but taking drones from place to place. So it's exciting as heck, and I cannot wait for you to meet Nikhil Goel. So take this next one and then take some notes. Again, we're highly recommending that you get involved in the LinkedIn group should you want to give some feedback or ask us some more questions. Other than that, I will see you in Module 3. All right. I am now joined with Nikhil Goel. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Don.
On the show, normally I do a podcast. Here I go. We're doing a lesson today, daggone it. So before we were recording, we're talking about some of the awesome things you've been doing. Before I somehow butcher it, tell us about Luber Elevate and how you got here.
Absolutely. So I co-founded the Luber Elevate team about 3.5 years ago at Uber. I'd been at Uber for quite a while before that, actually working on some of the really cool stuff that we had going on in emerging markets, and got to be part of the redesign of the Uber Rider app. But aviation is something that I have always been excited about and interested in. I grew up in a small town in Alabama that's basically everybody in the city works at NASA or works for the Army or works for one of the multiple government contractors building drones and rockets and spaceships for our country. And so grew up around that, and it was always a passion of mine. And at Uber, I saw with what we were doing as a company, which was really more than cars, but rather transforming cities, helping cities become smarter, better, more efficient places to live, which if you look at cities today, about half the world's population lives in urban cores. The UN projects that by 2045, that number is going to become about 6 billion people living in cities. That means we've gone from half of the world's population to pretty soon 2/3 of the world's population. But even as cities get larger and cities get denser, transportation options, at least in my opinion, continue to get worse. They get slower, less reliable, less affordable, and less clean. And at Uber, we really think about radically improving urban mobility and making the transportation of both people and things from A to B a lot better. And so we were doing a bunch of really great things, democratizing the cost of ground transportation with offerings like UberX and Uber Pool, obviously investing a bunch into alternative options such as self-driving Ubers, bikes and scooters, transit, etc. But even with all that, we said, hey, listen, it's not enough, because fundamentally the two-dimensional transportation grid that exists in our cities can't keep up. You can simply no longer build roads or expand highways. It's not going to be enough to handle effectively all of the people that are soon going to be in cities. And so we said, hey, listen, just like cities were able to use skyscrapers to alleviate the residential and commercial congestion on the ground by going to the air, could we do the same with transportation? That was really the spark of the idea 3.5 years ago. And we started working pretty closely with our former CEO, Travis, started working closely with NASA, really to examine this problem from first principles, right? Could you go, for example, from San Francisco to San Jose in 15 minutes? That's a trip that normally takes 2 hours by car. And what would it take? And so we started with the foil of helicopters, right? That's the only existing form of urban aviation today. We said, hey, if you took 1,000 helicopters, put them on the Uber app, would that work? Could we create a sustainable and affordable form of transportation with helicopters? And the answer is pretty quickly no, for 3 big reasons. One is noise. So most cities in the world have effectively outlawed helicopters for most uses, largely due to the amount of noise that they produce, which is not only loud, but based on the pitch and the characteristics of the noise is quite annoying to anyone who's around them. So the noise, the maintenance and safety implications of helicopters. Helicopters have hundreds of what are called single fault parts, where every one of those parts needs to be operational and well maintained to ensure a safe flight. And then all of the maintenance that goes into keeping the helicopter operational contributes to a direct operating cost that's tremendously unaffordable for most consumers. And so we looked at that and said, okay, helicopters aren't the answer, but what is? And that's when we started working with NASA. And so NASA had actually been working on this all-electric propulsion technology for about 30 years. A gentleman named Mark Moore had been leading the work. And instead of effectively one large rotor for a helicopter, you've got up to a dozen smaller all-electric independent motors that power the vehicle. And that's really important because from a noise perspective, it's about 100 times quieter. And so the noise is generally proportional to about the 5th power of the speed at the tips of the rotor for a helicopter. And if you shrink down the rotor size and then slow them down, you're able to get a significantly slower tip speed, meaning you've got a significantly quieter vehicle. In addition to that, because it's all electric, it's about 3 to 4 times more efficient. And it also has a wing like a traditional airplane. And so you're able to use the wing to power your flight. That gets you to an aircraft that's about 10 times more efficient. And so you've got an aircraft that's quiet, it's all electric, it's significantly safer, and it's significantly more affordable. And so what we said was, okay, the technology is there, the platform is there, meaning Uber's got 100 million monthly active platform consumers that would love to push a button and get a flight in their city. How do we convene the entire industry, the entire aviation industry, important stakeholders in government and communities to rally around this vision and effectively fast forward to this world of urban on-demand aerial transportation? So that was the vision, and that was the team that we ultimately ended up building.
Yeah, so that's quite a massive undertaking, and I think like the lesson that we were just going over with the students before this was that I have a thought and idea to starting to listen to feedback and understanding the iteration process. I can only imagine it like. According to the book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, you guys are 2.5, 3 years out from adoption. What is the not only customer feedback, but the iteration process like with something this massive?
Yeah, well, I think as innovators, I and the team have learned to become incredibly comfortable with being wrong. But at the same time, also being very principled about what we put out there. This vision, when we put it out there 3.5 years ago, um, it was on a large part based on principle and what we understood to be in the art of the possible versus what we knew as fact, right? 3.5 years ago, we said, based on how quickly we think we can build, and our partners can build and certify a safe aircraft, we think that an optimistic goal is being able to launch the service by 2023. And obviously, there's no way you can guarantee it. But what you can do is you can put all the pieces together and say, if this is true, if this is true, if this is true, if this is true, this is what it's going to take to make it happen. And largely, we found that a lot of the assumptions we made were correct, but a lot of them were also wrong. And so, what you have to be comfortable with is continuously being open to being wrong, taking in the feedback, reevaluating, and saying, okay, here's now the path of record. And we as a team have a culture of doing that constantly over and over again on a daily basis. And so, I think that is the largest part that's been able to keep us agile and keep us on our toes.
Man, I've got so many thoughts buzzing through my head right now. Number one, if I may say it so plainly and so boldly,
Sure.
you guys are ushering in an age where, quite frankly, you're ushering in the age of flying cars and Jetsons in a really broad sweeping way.
Sure.
I'm saying this, but number two, like some of these things like are so going to be hard for people to wrap their heads around in a lot of ways. Now, all the nice things you said, which is a fancy way of saying like things with a lot of motors and not helicopters are going to be safer. But you don't have to go two-way, which means you can go up and around. Like I remember the time I had to go from the other side of the Hollywood sign. What was that? What was the name of that city? Right behind there, but I had to go into Los Angeles. And if I could just go up and over, it would have taken me 5 minutes, but it took me 2 hours. Right. How are people starting to think about this? And secondly, what kind of changes do you think that people aren't thinking about that this is going to usher in?
Yeah. Well, what's really cool is one of our teams has actually built the first Uber Air product in New York that's operational today. And it's not with the new aircraft, it's actually using helicopters. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to start learning from a real consumer product that was providing value to people today. And so what we did is we took one of the most congested, most painful routes on Uber, that's Manhattan to JFK Airport. That's a trip that can take over 2 hours if you do it by car at the wrong time. And we turned it into a 7-minute flight. And so it takes off from Manhattan, it gets to the airport, it's about 7 minutes in the air. And what we also did was we put an Uber Black car at either end. And so it's a fully connected experience, meaning a car picks you up from home, takes you to the heliport. By the time you get to the heliport, and by the way, 3 other people are getting to the heliport at the same time, you all get into the helicopter together, fly to the other end, across the river and into JFK. You land, and by the time you land, a car's waiting for you to take you to the terminal. And all of that end to end takes about half an hour. It's about $200. And what we have started to learn from that is just how much people value being able to save their time. And again, that's an hour and a half, or at least an hour often that people are able to save off of their journey. And it's an hour that they get back, whether they at work longer, at home longer, just get to the airport in more time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I did that trip not that long ago. It's like $90 just to do it by car alone.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mercy.
It's certainly at more of a premium than taking a car. But what we're starting to learn is that people are willing to pay a premium to save time and get time back in their day. And I think that to your second question, what we're going to start to learn, and what we'll certainly see as we launch the broader Uber product, is all of the great things that happen in society when people get their time back. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have to live 10 minutes from work in a small 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. you can go choose to live somewhere else where you've got 2 or 3 bedrooms in a backyard, but you can still get to work in under half an hour.
Yeah, I remember thinking that too. And also in Peter and Stephen's book, they were talking a little bit about the fact that we might be able to spread out a bit. So kind of leading my other thought, a lot of times when I think of, we talk about underserved populations, a lot of times I think about also rural as well, because some of the resources are out. So I'm thinking of, wow, what an unbelievably great opportunity for especially a lot of students that may live out a ways. And instead of, driving in, finding a place to park, et cetera, they can have the aerial rides. My question is, though, as you start to think all this out, what are like those first barriers to wanting to go out to start to do rural? And 2 parts again, what will a landing zone look like?
Yeah.
Both in the city and then, because like you're talking about a new age subway station in a lot of ways, right? Or a new age
Totally.
Zone. So
yeah, we think of them as mobility hubs effectively. And so again, we think a lot of the trips will either be between cities. So say San Francisco to San Jose, to and from cities. So, JFK.
So the rural might take a while.
Well, we think about it as access to the urban core. And so anywhere where there's a considerable amount of demand for people getting to and from the city is very much in scope for us. And so the way that we think about infrastructure is largely, what existing infrastructure can we reuse? So let's take a parking garage, for example. So much of urban real estate is dedicated to parking today, whether it's parking on the street, parking in underground garages, or parking in large parking lots and garages that use up really valuable real estate, which could otherwise be used as a multifaceted mobility hub. And so the way that we're thinking about that is, one, these parking garages are becoming less utilized over time because of services like Uber, which allow you to no longer need to own a car. So obviously obviates the need for parking. That's number one. Number two is parking garages are actually really well situated. They're usually situated near areas of urban density, whether it's residences, whether it's commercial real estate, whether it's attractions that people want to go see, or sports venues. And so you're able to, the vision that we've put forth is take the very top deck of the parking garage, which is least attractive, at least from a consumer standpoint, having to drive all the way to the top. And instead of parking, let's turn that into what we're calling a skyport. So essentially similar to what you've seen either on TV or inside of cities today with heliports, turn the top deck of a parking garage into an area where aircraft can take off and land, into a small terminal space where passengers can, say, take the elevator up to the top of the parking garage. They can check in for their flight. They can congregate with the other passengers on their flight, meet the pilot or the staff that's going to take them to their airplane, and then safely board the aircraft and do all of that really quickly. In addition to that, we want to pair it with the ground transportation options because, as I mentioned before, these aren't going to be in your backyard. You may have to take a bike or a scooter to get there. You may have to walk to get there. You may take a short Uber to get there. And so we want to use the bottom area of those parking garages and skyports as an area to charge bikes and scooters, to charge electric vehicles, a place where you can very quickly exit one form of transportation and get on to another.
Wow. So I'm sitting here playing out this scenario in my head with, the oncoming wave of autonomous cars. And so you could like literally get all your time back. I could have an autonomous vehicle waiting for me. I could do some of my work in that ride. Yep. I could then go to a hub. I could go up and over, a mountain, a city, from city to city. I could talk to my wife. I could have some meaningful conversations with my kids. And then it's done for me. And then when I land, and this is one thing I like, what I never thought about, which is amazing. As we start to move to where the price of owning a car doesn't make sense because one is waiting for you, what happens to all these parking garages is really interesting how you have that planned out, that at the minimum, the top level, but then I'm seeing, gosh, entertainment options, like a little convenience store and things you can buy, because if you just landed and you're on your way to the arena and to the game, poof. So there's like, well, because I'm always wanting my students to be on the cusp of things and to start thinking about not just the obvious, but the things that are in the wake of these things. And, just owning real estate that might be seen as not that great could be repurposed and seen as really attractive and really helpful. And even, being able to serve people that like have mobility issues anyway, and what kind of services could be built around that. So love the way you guys are on the forefront of. Last question. So you guys are just having all these thoughts and all these things. And you said, I formed a team. How does one form a team around something that hasn't necessarily been done before? Did you hire a bunch of aviation specialists? Did you hire, how did you do that?
Well, honestly, we were really fortunate, one, to have a vision that a lot of people could believe in and get really excited about, right? Who hasn't either growing up as a kid watched something like the Jetsons or Back to the Future and dreamt about a flying car? And who hasn't ever been sitting in traffic just wishing you could push a button and fly over it all? And so I think the vision is something that resonates with just about every innovator and inventor and engineer out there. So
especially those who were raised on watching the Jetsons. This has taken far too long, Mr. Cole.
Right? And so recruiting people hasn't been tough, and we were also fortunate enough to get together a team of some of the world's leading mobility and aviation experts. We've got folks who spent decades at NASA. We've hired folks from Tesla, from Apple, from the US Army, people who were true experts in their fields. And these are a lot of folks who normally wouldn't work at a place like Uber or move to Silicon Valley, but we're tremendously excited about what we were trying to build, which is a combination of some of the greatness of Silicon Valley in terms of software and operations and consumer marketing, but also paired with industries that are decades old. And we are standing on the shoulders of those industries, such as aerospace, such as air traffic management, et cetera. And so what was cool about our team is we're able to bring that together, and our team kind of diversity and makeup reflects that, which is what's been truly, truly awesome.
Well, my mind's buzzing with all these things. I appreciate you putting out these prompts to us. Hope to look forward to maybe sharing some things back and forth in the future. But our students are going to have a lot to think about after this one. And
Good.
Yes, I sincerely appreciate you making time and putting together all this vision for us.
Absolutely. And look, we are on a multi-decade journey to transform cities. And so tremendously excited for a lot of the students watching this to invest time into learning about cities and transportation and mobility. And then two, I hope that folks will, when they go to college, explore topics that are related and maybe one day come join the industry.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.